Hello, we're at Brainy Books, Class 2, so you made it through 1. I'm glad you're back. The book that we're going to talk about today is called Wintering. That's the title. I call him a young American writer, Peter Geye. He's 46, that's young. Wintering is part of a series of 3 books, and the narrative is all related. This is supposedly the final book of this 3, but who knows, maybe he'll read another one. He lives in Minneapolis. He's quite interesting. He, in his own words, says he was a very lackluster, do-nothing kid in high school. So he had an English teacher that I think was pretty annoyed with him, but took him aside and said, shape up. You fool around in class all the time. And he was obstinate. This kid went home. Did not come from a reading family necessarily, but not books all over the house is what I'm trying to say. But there was an Ernest Hemingway book there, and he read it. He was defiant with this teacher. And he fell in love with writing. And he says there was no turning back after that. He knew this was what he wanted to do. And just an aside, you hear this often about writers and Hemingway. And that's another discussion. But as I said before, if you've taken the class, Hemingway was the first writer to introduce an extremely simplistic setup for writing, short sentences. He was a journalist. So, of course, when you're a young writer, you jump right on this because you feel that it is a concise way to express yourself. Okay, so he fell in love with Hemingway and started writing and never looked back. He now has his doctorate. A very long process with a lot of student loans. I'm always bringing them up, but these people actually pay to be writers. And very few of them make a living other than in academics. The books are secondary. So this is a tough, tough life. I want you to see him. He's in a little library in Minneapolis where he still lives with a sparse audience. But let's just take a look at Peter Geye.
Well, and actually I think I'm glad that you had that reaction because I think a lot of people are confused by it, and sort of understandably. I mean, her motivations aren't exactly clear all along. They're not exactly clear, but I think that when people suggest that to me, I think, well, but our motivations are so seldom clear. I mean, sometimes they are, of course. You know, I've got to get to the grocery store today to buy a gallon of milk. I'm going to go do that. But there's a lot of things that I think we do in life, and a lot of the decisions that we make, and a lot of the feelings that we have that aren't guided by logic or some mechanical impulse that we have. They're guided by our feelings and our emotions. And her whole life is, I mean, she has virtually none of the mechanical ability, and she exists purely in this sort of airy emotional realm. And I think that's finally her fatal flaw, you know. And again, it's not her fault. I don't judge her for it at all. But I think that she couldn't. And of course, there's the issue of how the town deals with it. This is a small town where everyone knows everyone and everything. But I'm also comfortable with the fact that in a small town like that, especially given the large personalities in the drama, that there's that no doubt people are going home and over their venison steaks talking about what's going on at the apothecary. You know, they're a bunch of Norwegians. They're not out on the street corner talking about it. They're keeping it to themselves and no doubt passing judgment themselves, but it's their business and this is our business, and that's how it is. And that's one of the things that frankly I love about Minnesota. I mean, you have it even, I mean, we live in Southwest Minneapolis, and we had a bunch of friends over for dinner last night, and you could just tell, moving from group to group and talking to people, that still exists. You know, that ability to not talk about it. We have a friend going through something very difficult, and it would be acknowledged, but you could tell everyone's mind just going like this, but no one is saying, oh, can you believe this, you know? And I like that. I don't know that you get that everywhere. I don't know if you don't get it everywhere, but I don't know if you do either. I spend as much time up on the North Shore as I can, not just researching, but recreating as well. It's sort of where it's our vacation destination for the most. We go other places, of course, but we go up there every summer and every winter at least once as a family, and I go up there other times. You know, and there's nothing about the North Shore that I don't love, especially, you know, going up in the Boundary Waters and going canoeing or hiking or running on the Superior Hiking Trail, or even just being in the towns. I love being in the towns and going into the Blue Water Cafe and just listening to the locals talk about deer hunting season or where the fish are biting and that sort of thing. And I would love to live up there, but it's impossible to. So a big part of my research is just going there and being a sponge. You know, every time I'm there, I carry a notebook, I write things down, and I just try to sort of soak it up. And I'm there. I mean, I'm up north at least 5 or 6 times a year. And when I was researching Safe from the Sea, it was before I had kids, and I would go up there all the time. I was probably up there 30 times over 30 weekends researching, you know, spending time in the library in Duluth and Two Harbors and just walking around towns and talking to people in the bars and cafes, and really feel like though I'm not from there, it's close enough to here and I've spent enough time there that I feel like I have some sense of who the people are. And that to me, frankly, is more important than whether or not she's wearing that apron in the book, or, you know, whether the geography is true to life, or you know, the way they talk, or those sorts of things.
The personal lives of these authors, I think, is very important. It helps you understand what they're writing about, because you know that it's, when you know something about them, they're putting themselves into this. So here is this young man, married, 2 children, living in Minnesota. He does not want to leave Minnesota, wants to stay in. A lot of people from Minnesota seem to be like this. This seems to be a state like Colorado that people just love. Anyway, he lives in Minneapolis, not in this northern part of Minnesota where the book takes place, but he's constantly going there. I'm talking about in his personal life. He's rooted there, and so he's thinking up these stories that take place in a place like northern Minnesota. And which brings me to the subject of how place influences all of us. It does. It does matter where we live. It does matter the influence of the topography of the land. So you've got this young man living the suburban life, more or less, in Minneapolis, but every weekend going to this. It's an extremely wild area, from what I understand, sparsely populated, a very different population in northern Minnesota than what we find in Minneapolis, which is a cosmopolitan city. But there is this area that he deals with in the book, the border between Canada and Minnesota, and much of it is unmapped, has never been mapped, and is unknown. And that's where, you know, the first part, or the first, I guess, half of the book takes place. And that's the part that interests me the most. Just sort of a note, I've been reading all about him, and then I read this one interview with him where he very haltingly says, well, now I live in a little apartment in southern Minneapolis, and I've lined all the walls of my apartment with books because I have separated from my wife, and you hear this over and over again, and I want to be near my children, so he rents a little apartment, and the wife and the children. This is just endless. The same story, but in a way, I think this is it's good. The fathers don't just disappear. So he's there, he's writing, he's also teaching, I think, and he puts the children on the school bus every morning, and he meets them when they get off in the afternoon. And there was a wistfulness in the interview that I read. Just makes it, to me, more interesting considering this plot. So then I read the book. I loved the book. It could be read as an adventure story. It could be read, it's been compared a lot to Into the Wild, Jon Krakauer. But it's all concerning this, excuse me, but what I call this macho, testosterone-filled world of men challenging nature. I find out who I am by how I confront nature. And I'm very interested in this, but more interested in father-son. And if you wanted to sum up what the book is about, my opinion is that the real meat of the book is in this crazy trip that the father kind of hoodwinks his son into, and the danger of it. And yet the son rises to the occasion. I'm going to read you a quote from the book. Every son wants to meet his father's challenge and to succeed. So this is from Jon Krakauer, which if you read Into the Wild, you understand that this was a kid trying to answer all of life's questions by isolating himself, by challenging nature, by coming up against it. These are all things that I consider to be very male traits. So this is from Into the Wild, and it applies to this book. But this is Krakauer talking. It's not always necessary to be strong, but to feel strong. You should make a radical change in your lifestyle and begin to boldly do things which you may previously never have thought of doing or been too hesitant to attempt. I mean this, you must confront it. Some people feel like they don't deserve love. They walk away quietly into empty spaces, trying to close the gaps of the past. I read somewhere how important it is in life, not necessarily to be strong, but to feel strong, to measure yourself at least once. That's Krakauer, but that whole theme runs through Wintering, I think. I'm struck by this. I mean, in the middle of this, I thought, what kind of father would do this to his son, would put him in such danger? All this, I mean, I was like, enough. But then I was drawn in. How far would it go? And, I mean, the good writing, he wove in the mystery. We find out why he has set it up this way. It is a resolution of vengeance. I'm not concerned about that at all. I'm reading this book because the writing, number one, is absolutely beautiful. And when people say that, what they really mean is the description of northern Minnesota, the description of the cold, the description of how the boy felt when he saw the bear. I mean, that's the writing. You've got the picture in your mind, you're there, more or less. It can bring up the question now to me, why in the world anybody would do this? I know why the son would do it. Why would the father put him in such jeopardy? So, is this really the theme of the book? I don't think so. And I think he superfluously, a little bit, put the woman who was in love with the father, what's her name, Barrett, as a counterpoint. We hear Gus's story, the son, and Barrett then gives him another story of her view of his father. She was madly in love with him. But we have two different pictures of this man, two different stories. And I think that's what it really is. This is family stuff. And families tell stories, and they pass them on, and they pass them on. And I think each person sees it one way from the place they're sitting at the table, and that's their version of it. I think what Peter Geye is really talking about is there are many different views to family histories. And since we are a storytelling species and we tell stories, you have to understand that. Her view of this man was totally different than his. And she thought she had some breakthrough news that would change his mind entirely about his father. But I don't think it did. And I don't think there is ever breakthrough news. We each see it through our own prism. What would entice a young boy to do this, to undertake this trip? This is Peter Guy's answer in the text from The Son Talking. And though I had misgiving, obvious ones too, one overwhelming thing drove me on. On the borderlands, my father would need me as much as I'd need him. That's what made me blindly ready to go off with him. What boy doesn't wait his whole childhood to walk alongside his father on equal terms? This is, Peter Geye, I think, tells us what he's writing about in this line from the book. History and memory aren't the same thing. History doesn't abide acts of the imagination, but memories depend on it. History doesn't abide acts of imagination. History is history, but our memories depend on it. They depend on our imagination. So, of course, in the telling of the stories, you're going to get some different versions, different looks. Him again. And memories are as much what we've forgotten as what we recall. History cannot be forgotten, but our memories, we have to keep recalling them. It is a really interesting thing. Further, he's saying, and this is what a good writer is, because I want you to get all of this. The ephemeral natures of our memories is one of the big themes in my book. This is Peter Geye talking. Our relationships with our parents, our siblings, the people we love, our children, it's constantly evolving. In that evolution, it seems to me, we lose a lot. We gain a lot by what we add to it, but we lose a lot by what we just simply can't remember. These are big truths, I think. The book is well worth it just for that. I want to end this now, but I have one little sneak interesting passage, because at the same time that I read this book, I was reading Karl Ove Knausgaard. This is, if you have not read, his books, the 6 volumes of his autobiographical book, then start. But I have to tell you, start with this one. This is his very latest book, and this is a simple book of very small essays and artwork, and I think it's so remarkable. I do think he's a remarkable author. It's sort of one of those love him or hate him things, but I do. But this passage I read at the same time I was reading Wintering, and this struck me too. So this contains small essays he's writing to his unborn daughter, but it is the same subject matter. When I think of my father, who is dead, and whom you will therefore never get to meet, it is striking how little I know about his life before he married and started a family, and how incurious I was about it when I was growing up. The same goes for my mother, your grandmother. But her, I can still ask about what it was like growing up, just after the war, for instance, or what they were actually taught at school, whom she was in love with before she met my father, what kind of people they were. For that's how it is. It's our own time that matters to us, at least when we're children and adolescents. And it's what people are like then that is important, not what they bring with them from before, nor from where. I will be 45 years old when you're born, and that means I can't expect to share more than 30 years with you, and during the last of these, I might be ill and feeble. If you ever have children, it might be that you have them when I am no longer here. In a way, there is something beautiful about that you will continue far into the future, and your children even further, and your grandchildren, for whom this, the house you grew up in, the family you were part of, will be no more than vague and hazy imaginings. But the grass will be green, the sky will be blue, and the rays of the sun rising in the east will flood the landscape and make it shine in every color. For the world doesn't change, only our conceptions of it. So I'll see you in 2 weeks, but I'm doing one of my tricks that sometimes you don't like it, but I don't know why, it doesn't matter. I'm switching the order of the books. And we're going to talk about Alexandra Fuller's Wait Until the Thaw in 2 weeks, the next book class. I want to do that. That's enough. It's good to be the king, I've decided. I want to do that. And anyway, you know not to trust me about the order of the books. I always switch them around. So do subscribe to our YouTube, please. Click on that thing. Do enter the comments box below. Respond, talk, let me know you're there. Let me know what you thought of the book. I mean, this is a book, some people I'm sure didn't like it. I was sort of entranced by it. Let me know what you think. Okay, so I will see you in 2 weeks on Brainy Books.